My name is Ethan Carter. I'm 51 years old, and 7 years ago, my parents stood in front of the entire family and handed my brother everything our grandfather had spent a lifetime building. The farm, 380 acres of prime Iowa farmland, the farmhouse, the barns, the equipment, the livestock contracts, everything. And me? I got a handshake, a smile, and a lecture about accepting reality. Back then, I thought that was the worst day of my life. Turns out, it was the best thing that ever happened to me. Because 7 years later, the same people who laughed me out of that inheritance drove across 3 states and offered to buy that farm back. The problem? I already owned something far more valuable, and they had absolutely no idea. If you've ever been treated like the family disappointment, if you've ever watched someone else get credit for work you helped build, then sit back, because this story feels unreal every time I tell it. I grew up on Carter family farms outside Cedar Rapids, Iowa. My grandfather, Walter Carter, started the operation with 40 acres and a second-hand tractor after returning from Vietnam. By the time I was born, he'd turned it into one of the most respected farms in the county. Grandpa wasn't a man of many words, but he believed in hard work, and he noticed things, especially when people thought he wasn't paying attention. My older brother, Blake Carter, was 2 years ahead of me. Blake was charming, funny, outgoing, the kind of guy who could walk into a room and have everyone laughing within 5 minutes. I was different, quiet, reserved, more comfortable fixing machinery than making conversation. My mother adored Blake. My father practically worshipped him. Everything Blake did was amazing. Everything I did was expected. If I got an A, they'd ask why it wasn't an A+. If Blake got a C, they'd throw him a celebration dinner. You know how some families have a golden child? Yeah. That was Blake, and everybody knew it. The funny thing is, Blake never actually liked farming. Not really. He liked the idea of owning a farm. He liked driving tractors when people were watching. He liked taking photos for social media. He liked being called a farmer. What he didn't like was waking up at 4 in the morning, or repairing irrigation systems, or spending 12 hours fixing broken equipment in freezing weather. That stuff? That was usually me, and Grandpa knew it. When I turned 16, Grandpa started teaching me things he never taught anyone else. How to negotiate grain contracts, how to analyze soil reports, how to predict market swings, how to manage risk. He'd sit across from me at the kitchen table for hours, sometimes until midnight. Most folks think farming is dirt and tractors, he'd say. They're wrong. It's business. It's strategy. It's patience. Those lessons changed my life. But my parents didn't care. To them, Blake was still the future of the farm, even when he disappeared every weekend, even when he spent more time partying than working, even when Grandpa quietly handed me most of the responsibility. The narrative never changed. Blake was the heir. I was the helper. Everything came to a head when Grandpa turned 80. His health started declining. Nothing dramatic, just age catching up with him. One evening, he called me into his office. The room smelled of coffee and old paper. He closed the door. Then he looked directly at me. "Ethan." "Yes, Grandpa?" "Don't build your future around expectations." I frowned. "What does that mean?" He leaned back. "It means people don't always do what's fair." That sentence stuck with me. At the time, I didn't understand why. A year later, I found out. Grandpa passed away on a rainy October morning. The funeral brought half the county together. Farmers, business owners, friends, family. Everyone came. I barely held myself together. That man had been more of a father to me than my own father. Losing him felt like losing my anchor. 2 weeks later, we gathered for the will reading. I still remember every detail. The leather chairs, the smell of coffee, the lawyer clearing his throat, my mother sitting proudly beside Blake, like she already knew what was coming. Maybe she did. The room laughed. Actually laughed. I can still hear it. My aunt, my cousins, even Blake's wife. Like I was some joke, some side character, some guy who had spent his entire life helping build a business that never belonged to him. I wanted to argue, I wanted to scream, but I didn't. Because something Grandpa once said echoed in my head. Never make emotional decisions in emotional moments. So I stood up, shook the lawyer's hand, and walked out. 3 days later, I packed my truck. My wife, Rachel, watched quietly. "You sure about this?" she asked. I nodded. "Yeah." "We're really leaving? There's nothing left here." She squeezed my hand. "Then let's go." We moved to Nebraska, a small town nobody in my family had ever heard of. Most people thought I was crazy, leaving everything behind at 44, starting over. No family support, no inheritance, no safety net, just experience, knowledge, and determination. What nobody realized was that Grandpa had given me something worth more than land. He'd given me the skills to build my own future. The first 2 years were brutal, absolutely brutal. We lived in a tiny rental house. Money was tight. Some months we barely scraped by. I worked 16-hour days, consulting, managing agricultural projects, helping struggling farms improve profits, doing whatever I could. There were nights Rachel and I sat at the kitchen table wondering if we'd made a terrible mistake, but she never complained, not once. Then things started changing, slowly. A farmer recommended me to another farmer. That farmer recommended me to 3 more. Word spread. People realized I knew what I was doing. Within 3 years, I had clients across 4 states. By year 5, I wasn't consulting anymore. I was investing, buying land, partnering with operations, acquiring struggling agricultural businesses, building something bigger than I'd ever imagined. Meanwhile, back in Iowa, Blake was running the family farm, and according to Facebook, everything was perfect. Every photo showed success. New trucks, new vacations, expensive dinners, luxury purchases. The guy practically lived online. My mother loved sharing every update. My son, the successful farmer. My son, the businessman. My son, the future. I muted them all. Then came year 6, and things got interesting. Because while Blake was busy showing off, commodity prices shifted, debt increased, expenses exploded, and suddenly the family farm wasn't doing nearly as well as everyone thought. I only knew because people talk, especially in farming communities, and what I started hearing wasn't good, not good at all. One evening, Rachel walked into my office holding her phone. "Ethan." I looked up. "What?" "You might want to see this." She handed me the screen. It was a photo. My parents, Blake, the farm, everyone smiling. But the caption caught my attention. "Hard times don't last. Families stick together." I stared at it, then smiled, because after 7 years of silence, I had a feeling somebody was about to call. And when they did, everything changed. If you're still listening, thank you. Because this is where the story goes from painful to downright unbelievable. The phone call came exactly 8 days after Rachel showed me that Facebook post. I was reviewing contracts in my office when my cell phone rang. The screen showed a name I hadn't seen in 7 years. Dad. I stared at it. Rachel looked over from across the room. "Who is it?" I turned the screen toward her. Her eyebrows shot up. "No way." I laughed. Oh, there's definitely a way. The phone kept ringing. Finally, I answered. Hello? Silence. Then my father's voice. Ethan? No apology, no warmth, no acknowledgement of 7 years. Just Ethan. Like he'd spoken to me yesterday. How have you been? He asked. I almost laughed. 7 years. Not a birthday card, not a Christmas call, not even a text message. And now he wanted small talk. I've been good. Another pause. Then he got to the point. We need to talk. There it was, the sentence every entitled family uses when they suddenly need something. What about? It's complicated. I leaned back in my chair. Try me. Another long silence. Then he said something I never thought I'd hear. The farm is in trouble. I closed my eyes. Not because I was surprised, because I wasn't. I'd seen this coming for years. The signs were obvious. Blake had been borrowing against future profits, taking loans, buying equipment he didn't need, expanding too fast, trying to look successful instead of being successful. And eventually, reality showed up. Reality always does. How bad? I asked. Dad exhaled heavily. Bad. Define bad. We might lose everything. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he said something that made my jaw tighten. We were hoping you could help. Not, we're sorry, not, we were wrong, not, you deserved better, just, we were hoping you could help. I told him I'd think about it. Then I hung up. That night, Rachel and I sat on our back porch watching the sunset. The Nebraska sky turned orange and gold across hundreds of acres of land. Land we owned. Land we'd built ourselves. No inheritance, no favoritism, no shortcuts. Just hard work. What are you going to do? Rachel asked. I stared at the horizon. I honestly don't know. She nodded, because she understood something most people didn't. This wasn't about money. It never had been. It was about respect. 3 days later, my parents showed up. In person. Along with Blake, the golden child himself. I almost recognized him. 7 years had aged him. His confidence was gone. His expensive clothes looked worn. His smile looked forced. For the first time in his life, Blake looked scared. We sat in my conference room. Nobody spoke for nearly a minute. Finally, Mom broke the silence. You look good. I nearly rolled my eyes. After 7 years, that's what she came up with? You look good? Then Dad opened a folder. Inside were financial statements, debt records, bank notices, loan documents. The situation was worse than I'd imagined. Much worse. The farm wasn't struggling. It was collapsing. We need investors, Dad said. No, Blake corrected. We need you. There it was, the truth. They hadn't driven across 3 states for advice. They hadn't come for reconciliation. They came because they were desperate. How much? I asked. Dad swallowed. $58 million. I almost choked on my coffee. $58 million? The room went silent. Then Mom reached across the table. Ethan. The way she said my name instantly annoyed me. Suddenly, she was my son again. Not because she loved me, because she needed me.
You've always been smart. Rachel actually laughed. Out loud. Mom looked embarrassed. Good. She should have been. For decades, she'd called Blake the smart one. Now, suddenly, I was smart. Funny how that works. Then Blake leaned forward. Ethan, I know things weren't perfect. Weren't perfect? That was his version of events? You laughed when they gave you everything. I said it calmly. No anger, no yelling, just facts. His face turned red. Dad jumped in. That was years ago. I nodded. It was. People change. I smiled. They sure do. The meeting lasted almost 2 hours, and the entire time they danced around one thing, an apology. Not once did they actually say it. Not once. Eventually, Blake looked directly at me. So, can you help? I stared at him, then smiled and asked one simple question. Do you know what I actually do now? The room went quiet. Blake blinked. Mom frowned. Dad looked confused. Because they didn't know. They'd spent 7 years talking about me, but never once talking to me. I stood, walked to the wall, and pressed a button. A giant screen lit up. The first slide appeared, then the second, then the third. Ownership reports, land acquisitions, agricultural partnerships, investment holdings, revenue charts, asset portfolios. My parents stared in disbelief. Blake's face slowly lost color, because while they'd been focused on one farm, I'd built an agricultural company operating across 5 states, more than 22,000 acres, hundreds of employees, multiple businesses, millions in annual revenue. And the most shocking part? I wasn't finished growing. Mom looked like she might faint. Dad sat frozen. Blake looked physically sick. Finally, Dad whispered, You own all this? I nodded. Most of it. The room fell silent. The same room where they expected me to save them. The same room where they still thought I was the forgotten son. Then I dropped the real bomb, the one none of them saw coming. The bank already called me. Dad's eyes widened. What? The bank. They contacted me last month. Now everyone looked confused, especially Blake. I folded my hands. The lender handling your debt also handles several of my projects. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Then I delivered the sentence that changed everything. I've already been offered the farm. Mom gasped. Dad went pale. Blake looked like he'd been punched. The bank had approached me privately, not because they wanted to save Blake, because they trusted me. They believed I could make the property profitable again. And honestly, they were right. So you're buying it? Blake asked quietly. I looked out the window for several seconds before answering, then turned back. No. The confusion on their faces was immediate. No? Dad repeated. I shook my head. No. Blake looked stunned. But why? Because they still didn't understand. They thought this was about revenge. It wasn't. The truth? I didn't want Grandpa's farm anymore. Not after 7 years. Not after building my own empire. That farm represented who I used to be, not who I'd become. Then I said something none of them expected. You already made your choice. Silence. 7 years ago, you decided who deserved that farm. I looked directly at Blake. You. Then I looked at my parents, and you all laughed when you did it. Nobody could meet my eyes. For the first time in their lives, they had nothing to say. Eventually, they left. No shouting, no arguments, no dramatic scene. Just silence. The kind of silence people make when reality finally catches up to them. 6 months later, the farm was sold. Not to me, not to our family, to a large agricultural corporation. The Carter family farm ceased to exist. Just like that. 3 generations. Gone. And honestly, I felt sad. Not because I lost it, because Grandpa deserved better. A year later, I visited Iowa for the first time in almost 10 years. I stopped by Grandpa's grave, placed fresh flowers beside the headstone, and sat quietly for a while. Then I smiled, because suddenly I remembered something he'd told me years earlier. Never build your future around what somebody else gives you. Back then, I thought he was talking about money. Turns out, he was talking about life. My parents gave my brother the family farm. They gave me nothing. No land, no inheritance, no opportunity. What they didn't realize was that sometimes the greatest gift is being forced to build your own future, because nobody can take away what you create yourself. And 7 years after they handed my brother everything, the people who once called me the family disappointment drove across 3 states, hoping I would save them. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need the farm. And I definitely didn't need their approval. Because while they were busy deciding my worth, I was busy proving it.